Okay, this is the Soarer or V8 1UZ intercooler kit, which is air to water intercooler kit supplied by Bullet cars. Basically comes with the intercooler specifically made by Bullet for the 1UZs. Bolts, a range of hose, 3/4 hose, plus the radiator inlet, which is in line up at a high point. And of course you have a pump, elbow, wiring and relay. Down here we have the intercooler, which has to be mounted at the front, a longer belt because the thing is higher, and a pulley. It's not completely complete, but you know, it's a basic kit. From there we make brackets, etc., and I'll do a video on fitting it up. Okay, this is the underbonnet, so we'll be taking off the intake hosing here, and then we'll be taking off the supercharger, pulling off the top plate, starting to mount in the new intercooler, and then we're running the pipes and that around the back. We may have to do a bit with the pipe at the back there, and we will have to bend the bracket there for the shift down cable. That will have to be adjusted. Could be a problem, but we'll have to work that out as we go. Okay, so we've removed the intake hoses, etc. All the other hoses hook up around the throttle body, etc. and remove the throttle body, then remove the supercharger. So now we have to take this plate off. Removing that plate, that will get us to where our intercooler will be going, in between that plate and the manifold itself. This is the supercharger off. Basically we should be able to leave this all assembled, not have to go any further down than that, leave the hoses, which are a bit difficult to get on there, and we may have to run some piping on the end here where the water methanol runs in, and a couple of these pipes here, because I think we're going to have to change the position of the throttle pressure cable. Now we remove the top plate. We will be taking the intake temperature sensor out and moving that into the manifold for a better position to get a better reading. Cleaning all the gasket material off, same as here. All the gasket material, we have to clean that off so it's all nice and clean. The manifold, the intercooler will be going between these two plates. Okay, we're having a couple of issues with the radiator, which goes inside for the intercooler, is touching on some of these things that there's not enough width, so we have to actually clean these up, which is going to probably give us a little bit of metal filings and that sort of stuff to go around. So I'm just now decided to pull the whole manifold off, because at the same time, while we have it off, it's going to be easier, because about here somewhere we're going to be putting in our intake temperature sensor, because we moved it from the back. So both of those will be a bit easier with the manifold off. So next job, manifold off. Okay, I've removed the manifold, which is complete manifold removed. And as you can see, when the intercooler goes in, you see the edge of the radiator there just touching those lugs. So we're basically going to try and take some meat off those lugs so that the radiator sits down inside, intercooler radiator sits down inside correctly. So take that off there. So the plan is to use air tool in that direction, and we will set it up. It's got the holes blocked, and also set it up with a vacuum cleaner to catch as much as possible, and just clean those up and probably clean a little bit off each one of them, just to make sure we have clearance all around, because you don't want it rubbing on the radiator. Okay, I actually took a little bit off every one of the little lugs on the side, and then confirmed that I have enough clearance. Make sure that when you put your radiator on, you can see the holes, and maybe just make sure they can come across a little bit more. So I took a little bit more off here, because it's to make sure it's got clearance and it's not actually rubbing on the radiator. Okay, so then the intercooler fits on there. The hoses have got to go that way. So one's probably going to go low, one's probably going to go high, because they've got to both come out of there and run around that side. It all sits down nicely. Now with the top plate on, just sitting there, that will have to be cleaned up and placed in position, cleaned up of those holes, and where that hole is going to have to be blanked off where the intake air temperature sensor used to go in, because we're now relocating it, going to have to go here. That's the next job. Going to go in here somewhere. Okay, I've drilled and tapped the thread for the intake air temperature sensor. It's now nice and low. It's below the level of the radiator, which is where that line is, and sits in like so. That should be okay. Okay, that's just with the test fit on the top. To get that bolt in that's underneath there, I have to take that sensor out and then put the sensor in after. I'm going to assemble the this block here at the moment so they can get ready to go back onto the car. Now we've cleaned all the surfaces and put some RVT sealant on the bottom part, the top part, so that the three parts will now bolt together. Okay, all the sealant cleaned up and all the bolts are all tensioned to the same amount, and it's ready to go back on. It's all cleaned up, the gaskets are all being, surfaces have been cleaned, everything, and the gasket surface in the head has already been cleaned. Got to clean up a bit at the back to make room for my pipes and that sort of stuff out there. Okay, we've I'll put the blanking plug into the manifold where the old sensor came out. Now we've got to move these hoses. They're sitting up too high. It's going to foul on the back of the supercharger, that top one, and the other one's in its road as well. So I'm going to lower the smaller one down probably about 20 mils or so and try and run the other big one in behind, so it'll be right back in against where the brake hoses and brake lines are that are going through there. And then I'll move the harness and run the wires across to the left hand side where the new sensor is going to be for the temperature, air inlet temperature. We've dropped the heater hoses right down, so now they should clear the back of the supercharger, and I've run the wiring across to this side here. This harness here, which is this one here, is going to be the one for the temperature, the intake temperature sensor, and I've released that bracket there so I can move back a bit out of the road. Okay, the plastic harness cover that was in the back there, which actually goes across that pipe there which joins the two heads together, which is water pipe, wouldn't let the rubber hoses which go onto the intercooler can't go down, and they couldn't reroute them. So I've moved all the wiring, taken the plastic cover off, moved all the wiring basically behind the two hoses there, but where the joint is in the middle, as you can see, I've brought them back in through the front. Hopefully we'll have enough length to get it all the way back down to the positions that have to go at the front of the head and that sort of stuff, because those other ones there go up to the front for all switches, etc. Now I've actually mounted these hoses in that position onto the intercooler. The reason I've done that is it makes it a lot easier. You can see the clamps are down the bottom, everything's sort of in position. I've test fitted it once and that sort of fits there. This bottom one, the water will come up, the air will come up to here, and this is going to be the highest point where the radiator cap will go into on the high hose. Hopefully it'll all fit in. I've got to squeeze it in past on this side where the lifting point is on the motor. It's going to be a bit of a squash, but it should be okay. We'll see how it goes. Okay, the pressure cable for the automatic transmission has always been a problem. It's always been very stiff and catchy and that. So what I've just found, if I have that on the angle, so it's not, you know, coming in at 90 degrees to where the throttle cable comes, it still works. So that angle there stops the cable from sticking, and it's got a bit of a kink in the corner here, but at least it works and it doesn't get stuck, etc. So I've had to modify the bracket. As you can see, what I've basically done is just put that bracket on a much bigger angle. Okay, that is a template of the original cable attachment which goes onto the supercharger, so you can run the pressure cable down to the automatic transmission. The biggest issue with that, when that bends up straight, is the cable comes in straight from that direction and it's straight, but unfortunately it's so close to the house, the back of the firewall, it has to come around a really tight corner, which causes it to jam. So I'm trying to fix that this time. So this is my first attempt. What it does, it's bringing the cable in at an angle for the housing, but the actual cable comes straight out. So what will happen, the cable will come from this direction, cable comes from this direction and comes in at an angle to the cable, but the cable is now feeding straight in, and it's now nice and free. It doesn't jam, doesn't carry on. So this is the template here. I'm going to try and make that one up. That will bend up the same as the other one, and the cable will come in on an angle, and the actual inner cable will actually touch the side of the wall, but it makes it so that it's not jamming and carrying on all the time, I hope. Okay, this is where the throttle cable and that go in through here. It's quite high. Now I've got a problem, it's actually hitting up there, so I have to relieve that so that that bit of that doesn't bash against that. It's actually pushing the bonnet to one side, and the bonnet's actually resting right on it. Okay, so I had a bit of dramas getting the brackets and that made for the throttle input, so I did that. I'll have to show you some pictures of those when I've finished. So from there, to get the radiator in, the intercooler radiator in, we have to make some room. So I pull the front plastic off the front of the car, which you find somewhere, and there's a little scoop that goes in under here, which normally goes in between the radiator. Pull that out. So as you can see, we've got big space in here now where we're going to have to try and put this intercooler in. We've got to make it all fit in there, but yeah, I had to take that scoop out, which was in front of the radiator before. Probably end up putting the other one, the stone guard, back underneath when we put it back together. Okay, I've got the intercooler radiator mounted. It's about 30mm in behind there. Can't go any lower because then they'll get no air getting into the radiator setup. So that's in the first half of the scoop. It's going to be sitting into the bottom of the first half of the scoop, and the second half of the scoop is going to go into the radiator and all the other radiator setup inside there for the air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. Now up under here is going to go the pump, which is that was a bit of a drama to get the pump in there, but also getting the radiator, the hoses. As you can see, these hoses, I've drilled one hole really low there, and I've pulled the other one over the top to come around the corner, so I'm going to have to use all those elbows. But inside here it's a little bit squashed. Had to cut all the bottom of the radiator, the battery tray, to bring it around through there. So as you can see, it's coming down there, through there, in past the other radiator, around the side, in behind the headlight. That should clear all the headlight. Bring it into the inside here, and then it'll have some elbows into the water pump, across to the radiator, and then we can just bleed it all up. Okay, this is taken from inside, or the back of the car. This is inside the bumper bar. I pulled the bumper bar off to put some nutserts, 8mm nutserts in there to support the brackets, which are the 3 bracket supports there. And then I've made this shroud up. The radiator inlets come in and out through there, the drains at the top. Got to make a couple more holes there to clear the mounts. The mount at the bottom here is set up. Then I'll probably have to Sikaflex it into the top there, so the radiator will come in from the back here and have foam around it, so it's sealed. So the air will come in through the bottom top vent and be forced in between there the radiator sits here, so it'll be forced between the front bumper bar and the radiator up through there. Half of it's uncovered but the rest of it's covered, so it forces all that air into that area there. It should keep it cool. Okay, this is the shroud setup, which is ducting the air into the radiator. The air is coming in the front and it'll have foam here, etc., and the air will be forced in through the radiator up and behind there. Cutouts for all the mounting brackets, and around there, and on the bottom just got one bracket and it's going to be held with a pop rivet. All across the top, just pop rivets. That should hold it, should be solid. Okay, that's the water pump. Bringing an elbow, pumping it there, coming out at 90 degrees, then going down into the radiator, down and back into the radiator. A bit difficult to see, but there it is in there, but it's, as I said, very dark. Got the trying to bleed it at the moment, and that should be the high point. Bit worried about that second hose there, is about the same height, so I'm thinking air might sit in there as well, so it's a bit difficult to bleed. So I've got it bleeding there now. I might actually bleed it before I put the supercharging it on permanently. So when I've got the manifold off, I'll set it up and make the air come back into that secondary one and make sure I get it all out before I assemble it. But yeah, so the pipes are going there, right down through there, in beside the battery, coming out through here. I might do this in the daytime. The top hose is going into there, and the other one is going into the water pump. Okay, due to the fact that we've got the intercooler in there now, the supercharger is now 32mm higher, so we have to get a longer belt, and in the kit they've supplied this idler pulley. That now will keep any flex in that. Apparently they've had a bit of vibration on some of the high performance motors with the belt vibrating, so that it will take that out. That goes into the middle cam, top cam support, belt support setup there, where the bolt is there, which comes in. It's just test fit at the moment. The other thing I find a bit scary is how close the belt is running to the radiator hose. I've actually pulled the hose up to the, so it's further away, because there is a bit of a taper there, and hopefully that's we'll sort that out. But looks like we have to cut a hole in the actual housing to clear the pulley, so there'll have to be a hole in the actual cover that normally goes over this area, and it'll be the sort of diameter of that pulley there. So the pulley will actually go into the housing a little bit. Okay, one of the bit more difficult thing is to get your hole which your pulley is going to get clearance sorted out. I just measured it all with the pulley on there, but the easiest way is if you can work out approximately where the center is, and as long as you've got a big enough hole to clear the boss on the back of the pulley, you can then wind it in and then mark around the pulley and cut it so that's pretty much the size. As you can see, mine's a little bit oversized because I did it a hard way. But yeah, put the pulley in after, so the cover and that goes on first and the pulley goes on after. I've got the big air filter modification. Originally the air used to come up from in front through the ducting at the front, which in through the side there, which now, because of the intercooler, it's taking up most of that area there, so it's only going to be hot air, and that there's not enough room. So I basically opened this up, and I'm going to go down on the left hand side where the intakes are for the brakes, and in there the cooling inside there. So I've made up an aluminium box which I'll fit up now, and then that goes in, and then the front engine, the front bumper, etc., all goes on, and that just slides up into it, and so it breathes in underneath, comes in underneath here and up in through here. Okay, this is the big air filter setup modification. I've also used to take the ducting through the front grille, but now I've had to block that off because it's now used for the intercooler, and I've taken the intake for the thing down below here, which will go into the couple of holes which are in the front cowl, etc., where the air can come in, and it'll come up in behind under the headlight and into the cool air box. Okay, this is the new intercooler, the radiator, which is now in the top section of the ducting of the Soarers. I've had to move my cold air intake because it was that's where it was originally. Now they're taking up most of that room, so I had to move the cold air intake across here to the other couple of scoops that are in the front of the car, and that's getting air up into the big air filter setup. And they all look pretty standard, so yeah, a fair bit of work we got there. Okay, the car's all back together and running. That's, as you can see, is the intercooler radiator. The top half of that inlet, the bottom half still going through to the radiator and aircon. That is now my cold air intake going up in through that side there. As you can see, the supercharger sits a fair bit higher. I have room in the bonnet because I punched a hole in the top it before, so that's the reason I'm able to now fit that under there. Apparently it's supposed to fit, but it's a tight fit. These modifications I had to do there. I had to drop the throttle cables down because they were actually, top of the throttle cables were hitting on the bonnet itself. Another modification is that bracket, which was turns the throttle control, which is used to do the pressure on the changes for the automatic transmission. I've made an angle on that so that actually does actually open and close quite readily now, whereas before it was very stiff. Can't see it, but the idler pulley is now on there, and the new extended belt, and everything actually gives you a little bit more room with the supercharger sitting up that high to get everything in there. Had to drop those hoses, everything down the back, and she's all back together.